All right. So college football. I'm just going to give some. I just have some takeaways, Clark, that I wrote down just because on the heels of me blasting the SEC like I did last week, because I got tired of the SEC media machine, acting like a bunch of lunatics and just not being completely unreasonable and insane. That I think that it was like, oh well, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Indiana doesn't deserve it. Indiana's ranked 5th. This is ridiculous. Last week, like, oh, the Indiana would lose 4 games in the SEC. This is whatever. And then this weekend happened, Clark. Oklahoma beats the shit out of Alabama. Okay, Ole Miss gets beat by Florida. Texas A&M loses to Auburn. Right, like I don't. You have literally, you didn't have much of a leg to stand on last week, SEC. You have nothing. Like, I don't want to hear any of your nonsense about we deserve this and we deserve that. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear about your schedules. Like, I don't want to hear it. Okay, your strength of schedule is better. Great. You got to win the games, though. Like, your strength of schedule means nothing if you don't win the games. So, I've just had it with this, strength of schedule matters. Like, it is a tool to be used. It is not a deciding, like, the end all be all of, oh, this is what you got to be. Greg Sankey puts out a tweet, basically puts like the top 10 strength of schedules. They're all SEC teams. Yeah. So freaking what? Okay.
Yeah.
I've watched your teams play. Like, I'm supposed to believe Alabama's really good. Seriously?
Yeah.
You lost to Vanderbilt? Yeah, 3 losses. You lost to Vanderbilt. You got physically dominated by Tennessee. Tennessee didn't even play that well, and they beat you. And then you go to Oklahoma and get destroyed. Okay? Oklahoma is not – they're a 5-5 team. Like, they're an average team. They can't really score that many points. And you had no chance in that game. Jalen Milroe had like 15 rushing yards. Like, so I don't want to hear it from you, SEC. I'm done with the whole thing. So, now you can rank the teams however you want, and we can talk about all that. But yeah, I just, like, to me, this like ends the conversation about, oh, we're gonna get 4 or 5 teams in. No, you're not. You're not even close. So stop, quit the nonsense. Yes, do I think the SEC is the best conference? Yeah, I do. But that doesn't mean you get to just do whatever you want. It doesn't mean you just get all the benefits of the doubt and it doesn't matter what you do. No, it does matter. It does matter what you do. So yeah, it just drives me nuts. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you got to let these things play out. That's what happens in college football. Like, oh my God, well, this and this and this. Well, what, it's like, is the season over yet? No. Well, they'll keep playing and then we'll see what happens. And invariably, teams are like, oh, well, you can't put this team in or whatever. They're not that good. And then they play somebody, they get beat, or they show up and it's like, oh, I guess maybe they are pretty good. So, yeah, this is what happens. So you got to let things play. So going nuts about the rankings one week really doesn't matter. All that matters is if they get it right at the very end, and then the teams play each other, and then whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, and you can't talk to me all day about people being disrespected, right? Oh, they're disrespecting Indiana. Indiana was 5th. They're not being disrespected at all. The SEC
thinks they just got their butts kicked.
Right. So. The SEC thinks they should be not in the playoff at all. And then you got these media people telling me, no, they're being disrespected. They should be 2nd or 3rd. No, you shouldn't. Do wins matter? Yes. Of course they matter. But they don't matter enough for Indiana to be 2nd or 3rd in the country. And we talked about, so I want to enumerate this with, the Indiana losing to Ohio State. I have a couple of comments on this game. So I think, Clark, what people are missing is, and we talked about this before the season started, Clark, we were on this at the beginning. There's a difference between playoff worthy and national championship worthy. And I think people are messing these things up. They think because Indiana's probably not really a national championship contender that they're not worthy of being in the 12-team playoff. They think that
there aren't 12 teams that are national championship
exactly, and that's what I'm going to get to. But that I think people have just we've completely lost sight of this. Okay. As evidenced by, let's go over the Indiana Ohio State game. Look, guys, that game was not really competitive. I know people are going to try to tell me that it was. I know it was 7-0 at one point. Okay. I get it. And I know Indiana made some mistakes that turned that game into something else. Indiana had 150 yards of offense for the entire game. Okay. And if you take out the one drive, they had under 100 yards. So, that everybody's going to be like, oh, well, you look at the score. They beat them by 23. Okay. They were clearly the better team. There was no question as to who the better team was. Okay. They easily covered the spread. I know that doesn't matter to everybody, but it's a data point. It's something. And, and I see the argument on the Twitter. Danny Cannell's trying to make the argument. Well, it came down to 2 plays. Like, they screwed up the punt and then they allowed the punt return and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But those weren't fluky plays. That wasn't like the ball got tipped up in the air and got intercepted. Those weren't like anomalies. Like, your punter dropped the ball. That's an unforced error on you. You allowed a 70-yard punt return for a touchdown. That's on you. You couldn't score for 55 minutes in that game. That's on you. Like, so no, it wasn't like, oh, I thought, and he's like, Indiana proved they belong. Okay. So, but let's clarify that. They proved they are worthy of being a top 12 team. I don't think there are 12 teams better than Indiana. Okay. But they are not in Ohio State's league. They are not in the national championship class. That's what happened in that game. That game should have been a lot worse. You're going to talk about, oh, we slowed down Ohio State. Ohio State was taking it easy, especially in the fourth quarter of that game. They had that game in hand. That was not an issue. So, yeah, Indiana's not elite. That's okay. This 12-team playoff. And the thing is, Clark, if you go back in history and you look at it, and I did this, I went back through the 10 years of the 4-team playoff. There were many, many years, like 5 or 6 years, where we had 3 lost teams that would have been in the playoff. There was one year where we had like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So it's okay. It's totally okay. And we don't have to have this stupid argument about, well, is Indiana, we don't have to go Indiana 11-1 versus Tennessee 10-2, which whatever. This weekend basically turned the argument about who gets the last spot into just not, it doesn't even matter. It's irrelevant to the discussion. Some team's going to get it. It's like, all right, whatever. You can argue for somebody else if you want. It doesn't really matter. They deserve to be in about as much as somebody else. So, yeah, I'm amazed, Clark, that we just can't. College football is so elitist. It's been so elitist for so long that now we can't. In the same arguments, like, well, Penn State, who the hell have they beaten? Okay, Penn State's beaten 5 teams that are bowl eligible. Okay, they beat Minnesota. Minnesota's 6-4. Is Minnesota a great team? No, but they went on the road. They won the game. A lot of these other teams went on the road, couldn't, not only lost, but were bad. A lot of them. So, no, and they have the 35th or 38th strength of schedule. So just because they haven't beaten a whole lot of top 25 teams, and this is where we get lost, Clark, ranked wins. What's a ranked win? Like, Notre Dame beat Army last night, and that's considered a ranked win. Like, does that really impress you? So yeah, I think that beating teams in the top 40 or 50 or 60 is valuable just because they're not ranked in the top 25, right now. So,
right.
Yeah. So what do you, the difference between being playoff worthy and championship worthy, Clark, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, that's, but again, I think we predicted that this is what was going to happen. Everybody just, we're so used to it only being the teams that we actually think can win the national championship. And now we got 12 teams and, there's several of those teams that just are not going to be able to win the national championship. Like, it just is what it is. So yeah, I think, I just think people are used to arguing in college football. So they like to argue about this stuff when in reality, it's like, look, guys, any of the teams that are really, really good this year, they're going to be in.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have that like those second tier teams, you're going to have probably most of them are going to get in too. So really, I know people don't really like this. There's really no controversy left. There really isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened with Florida State, that's never going to happen again.
Right.
That's totally eliminated. So all the team now, if you want to quibble about, seeding, like, okay, go ahead, but do you care about seeding? I mean, if you're in the NBA playoffs, like, do you want to be an 8 seed or 7 seed? No, and you're probably not going to win the championship. Even if you're a 6 seed, you're not going to win the championship. You better be like a 1 through 4 seed, okay? But in the NFL, like, it doesn't really matter that much. In college, yeah, the higher seeds, like, those are probably the best teams. So I guess that matters to an extent. But, those first round games, are we really going to care about the seeding? Is the seeding really going to make the difference? Like, granted, some of these, you'll be playing on the road, some of these teams. So that obviously makes a difference, I guess. But, like, I don't know.
Yeah. And listen, yeah, obviously teams playing on the road really struggled this week, but yeah, I agree with you. I think these arguments are going to be, they're going to pale in comparison to what we're trying to do here, and which college football, they accomplished it. Like this 12-team playoff, I wrote down in my notes, you can't screw this up, Clark. College football is the worst run sport that we have by far. It's not even close. Okay. And this is still going to be awesome. Like, you can complain about Indiana getting in, really? Like, well, who's your team that you're like, oh, they don't deserve it, really, compared to some of these? Have you watched some of these other teams? Like, like you can't find 12 teams. Like, that's the hard part. It's like, the good part is about this, or the difficult part is choosing the 12 teams. The good thing is, it doesn't really matter who the 12th team is. Like, all right, you can take 3 or 4 of them. So what? Doesn't matter. They're all about the same.
They're going to end up moving to 16 teams.
Yeah.
And then and I just think people are so conditioned to argue about it. They're going to be like, well, we can't have 16 teams now, because then, and it's like, you guys were some of the same people saying that the BCS was ridiculous and you didn't like the 4-team playoff because, you didn't have enough teams. And it's like, you can't have it both ways. It could either be exclusionary or you can have a lot more people in. It is what it is.
Yeah, and all the people complaining about this 12-team playoff is a bad idea or whatever, you're all wrong. You're so wrong. It's unbelievable how wrong you are. Like, this is fantastic. It's made the regular season better. Like, you and I were like, oh man, I don't know, last weekend of the regular season, is this going to hurt? Whatever. It's like, hasn't hurt it at all. It has by far enhanced it. I'm staying up to watch Auburn against Texas A&M last night that goes into the 4th overtime because it was ridiculous. College football is awesome. Even though they try to screw it up all the time, I don't think you can. And so, yeah, I'm more jacked up than I ever could be about the playoff. And I think Indiana's going to be in. I don't see any way to keep them out the way things have gone now. And now the way this is, this is kind of changed with the teams losing and all that stuff. And that's what we forget about college. Everybody does this every year with college football. They forget teams are going to lose and you're going to move up, and it's pretty much going to work itself out. And it does. It totally does. And, so, but some crazy takes this week. Like, Ryan Russillo was I'm sorry, I'm not okay with Indiana getting an 11-1. I'm like, really? Really? Oh, I'm sorry. You got all these teams that are so awesome that we have to put in there. It's like, I don't have a problem.
How many Big Ten teams are we going to put in there? You're going to put Oregon. You're going to put Ohio State,
Penn State, and probably Indiana. So it's 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the problem? And then you're going to put from the SEC. You're going to put Texas,
Georgia, Tennessee, and then we'll see if we get a 4th one, depending on what happens with Texas A&M or one of those other 3-loss teams can move up.
Okay, and then you get the conference, the Big 12, and then the
ACC, yeah,
the ACC, and then you're going to get
Notre Dame,
and then what? 1 or 2 more teams.
Yeah, I mean, it looks right now like, I mean, the Big 12 I don't think can get more than 1 team in, just because there's a 4-way tie right now for first place. So I think whoever wins, I think it's just going to that'll be one from them. And then the ACC has a chance now because Miami and SMU are probably going to play in the conference championship game. They both have one loss. Clemson's sitting there with 2 losses, but they play South Carolina next week. So there could be a conversation about, 4th SEC team, 2nd Big 12 or 2nd ACC team. That's kind of what I see that coming down to right now, but who knows? I don't know what's going to happen next week. If it's anything like this weekend, I don't have a clue what's going to happen. So right now I don't think Alabama and Ole Miss are going to get in.
Right.
It's not looking good for them, but could things change? Absolutely they could change. But yeah, I have zero issue with that. And then I heard this other complaint today. Oh man, we can't put a group of 5 team in. This is ridiculous. They don't deserve to be in, blah, blah, blah. It's like, have you watched the Big 12? Like you watched that Arizona State BYU game. You're telling me Boise State can't compete with them? Like, that's ridiculous. So yeah, I have no problem being inclusive with this. And I'm sorry, we're protecting this college football playoff like it's our baby and we can't let anything happen to it. Like, bullshit. Like, this is perfectly fine. I have zero issue with it. The other one was Joey Galloway on ESPN last week was like, I think Indiana, like they still have a pretty good percentage chance to make the playoff, even if they lose to Ohio State. I think they should rest their quarterback this game. Just take this game off, because you don't want your quarterback to get hurt because then you won't make the playoff. And it's like, first of all, it's not apples to apples what you're comparing here. That's completely different. 14 playoff, totally different than 12 teams. Okay. Like in a 12-team playoff, last year's Florida State team gets in. I don't care who they're playing at quarterback. So just the ridiculousness that happens here. Like I hate to break it to everybody. No one wants to talk about this. No one's going to say it. The committee's doing just fine. Their rankings are working out exactly like I said they would. They put those 2 loss teams behind Indiana in a cluster, and what happened? Right? They were right. They had Indiana behind Penn State and Texas. They were right. Look what happened when they played Ohio State. That's why they weren't in the top 4. So, no, they're doing a really good job with the rankings. You can complain, well, this team would beat this team on a neutral field, and I think they're better. You can't do that. You got to go by the results, and that doesn't mean like we're just gonna be arbitrary about it. Well, they won, so that means they're better. It's like, no, we're going to use some logic and discernment. Strength of schedule matters, but it is not everything. Yeah. So, yeah. So I think, I think that's what I wanted to say about that. I also wanted to point out that I was right, that the SEC needs to calm down. I'm tired of the self-aggrandizing, well, we're better than, nah, you know what? You're not. You're not right now. Doesn't mean I still think you're the best conference. Oh, and that's the other thing. The last thing I wanted to say was, you know what? We don't care about your conference. I don't care what conference you're in. This is not about, this conference is better, this conference is better. Every team is an individual basis, especially now because the schedules are all over the place. Like, right. Oh, well, they wouldn't win in the SEC. Well, what schedule do they get? If Indiana got Missouri's schedule, they do pretty well. Right? If they got Georgia's schedule, maybe not. But you can't do that. You can't go, oh well, they'd have no chance in this conference. It's just that's a bunch of crap. So yeah, this is gonna be fantastic. We got the rivalry weekend, which I was worried, oh man, I don't know if this is gonna be any good. So many more games matter than used to. This is gonna be fantastic. And then championship Saturday after that. So anyway, yeah, you can't screw this up. I really don't care what people try to use as their argument that why the committee's terrible. I'm sorry, the committee's not terrible. The committee's doing just fine. Anyway, all right. Anything else on college football, Clark, before we get out of here?
No.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was amazing, and it'll be nice to see Notre Dame actually play somebody this week instead of watching them win by 40. Like I'm kind of tired of it. They have to go out to USC. I think Notre Dame's a better team, but there's a chance that they'll probably be in a competitive game. which, they haven't been in, Notre Dame hasn't really been in a competitive game since the game I went to at the end of September. So that'll be entertaining.